Welcome everybody. We are going to go into a new topic today, which is the north-south strangle. This is something that's been a little bit dismissed as maybe just like a big guy move. Maybe you have a guy that's like pretty wide in the gym and he hits it on you and you think that it's just because he's round, right? But it's actually a really good technique. It's used as an auxiliary move from when we lose the back a lot of times, and it can also be a really unorthodox move when it looks like you're going for other more common top pin finishes such as Kimuras and arm bars. So first we're going to go over how to do it, and then we're going to show how to create the necessary conditions and some of the common setups to it. Okay, so Jake is laying on his back with his head towards me. What we're looking for with a north-south strangle is one arm over his neck and then my palm facing down. And then what I'm looking to do is start moving my body away from him and start connecting my shoulder to my wrist. So a lot of guys will look at this and think like it's just squeezing, but it's a very specific motion that we need to be doing, which is my shoulder down to my wrist. And before we even get there, what I'm looking to do is make sure that Jake's head can't turn and look at me. If he can turn and look at me, there's no strangle. So we use our rib cage on the side to station his chin in a vertical position as opposed to moving in this direction. And then we use our bicep to cut off this artery. And then our pressure of our rib cage and our ability to bring our body to his neck is starting to cut off this side. So it's really important that we don't be too high on the body, and we also get a really flush connection lower and on the neck. So when we're doing this, if Jake's head is straight on the ground, it's gonna be very hard for me to set this up. And we'll talk about how to get his head up in the air so that we can throw these in deeply. But just for the finishing mechanics here, if I get any kind of situation where his head's up slightly, I'm gonna throw my arm through, and we'll show this on the other side in a moment. I'm gonna throw my arm through, I'm gonna get it really tight, and I'm moving my rib cage to the side of his head like this. I'm turning onto my side and on my hip a little bit. Ultimately, I wanna get on my belly so that I can really bring my driving pressure down onto his throat, and we can start to get really tight strangulations here. It's not gonna be something that's supposed to be super painful. It's supposed to be a strangulation, right? So when we get here, we're just turning our ribs initially so that we can keep his head in place and I can keep his chin facing up and not looking towards me. I'm using my ribs to keep his head in place. Now, what we're looking to do is we're trying to get our head to the outside of his arm. I really don't want Jake to be pushing up on my neck like this. This is gonna be really painful. This is not a battle you wanna be trying to wage here, where you're just bringing your neck down onto his forearm. So what you're trying to do is slap this by and get your head to the outside. And now I have my palm facing down, and I'll show you why this is important in a moment, but we have our palm facing down, and I'm looking to take my hand onto his trap or his top of his shoulder, like in his AC joint area, and move my body back. So when I move my body back, I'm taking my shoulder from where it originally was, which was higher up, almost to like his upper chest area, lower and more towards his throat. So now as I inch backwards, I'm disconnecting. I'm like throwing my body backwards slightly, like this. And while I do it, I'm coming from a position where I'm more on my hip to more on my stomach. And now I start walking to a true north-south position where I'm completely parallel with him. We are one line now. So when I'm in this completely parallel north-south position, I still keep walking there and I make sure that I'm disconnected. I've done my throwback, and now I'm taking my hand palm down and I'm connecting my hands, and I'm looking to bring my shoulder down into my wrist like this. So right here, I'll show you how much this is where Jake starts tapping. It doesn't take a lot of pressure if you have a good connection. It's just a little movement of the shoulder to the wrist. So without Jake here, what I'm looking to do is I get it. Originally, I'm too high though. I'm gonna bring my head to the outside because I don't want him forearm cross. I don't want him like doing a reverse cross face on me here. And then what I'm gonna do is post on his shoulder so I can throw my body back and disconnect. You can see my shoulder goes lower. So my shoulder's up here first. I move so that my shoulder goes lower and flush to the neck. And now what I'm looking to do is keep my hand this direction. This seems like it's not a big deal, but it's different than this. And the reason is because you guys work out, obviously. If we flex our biceps and we're trying to show our bicep makes a ball in this position where I have my hand posting up, right? But when I go this way, it's a flat surface. So I have more ability to cover the surface of the carotid when my hand is down versus this, okay? So when we go down, we have a more solid connection of our whole entire bicep to the neck versus this, where there can be little pockets, which is what we don't want. And it makes it easier for me to bring my shoulder to my wrist, which is the action we want. We're not squeezing, we're not just doing this, we're specifically trying to bring our shoulder to our wrist. Okay, so when we get there, we're pushing back, we've sunk our shoulder lower, we're walking to the true north-south position, and then we're bringing our shoulder, we can bring our hands together, we're bringing our shoulder to our wrists. Okay, so if I show this from the other angle, I'm here on top of Jake initially. I get some kind of raising or elevation of the head, and then I go as deep as I can initially, and I turn my rib cage into the side of his neck. This is not where I'm gonna finish, but this is to keep him here while I start adjusting my strangle. I adjust it based off of this position because I don't want his neck and his chin to face me. If his chin faces me, this strangle connection is not gonna be tight. So I'm using my rib cage to turn his chin in that direction to make sure it stays elevated and up towards the ceiling. Now, my chest is too high, so I bring my head to the outside because I don't want this battle to be starting here. So I can post to the outside. I go to his AC joint and I push back even further. I sink my shoulder lower now. My palm is on the ground and I'm looking to go true north-south. And now I just go shoulder to hands to finish. Okay? So this is a really good strangle for, especially when you might lose the back, and especially when you are going for common techniques such as the Kimura or the armbar, where people would expect you to be attacking limbs and not throats, right? So a good scenario where you could use this is if I am on Jake's back and I have my seatbelt grip, but Jake is a good hand fighter and he has very good responsible hands. So when I say responsible hands, I mean that Jake has his primary defensive hand, which is always the opposite hand of my strangle arm. My strangle arm is always the arm that's over top of the shoulder. I'm never gonna strangle him with this arm, right? Unless it's one of these unique Rotolo style Katagatamis from the back, but we're not in that position. So this is always gonna be my strangle arm. This one is not. So he has his primary defensive hand blocking and C-gripping my wrist so that if I try to bring it up, I can never bring it across his throat. So when he's being really defensively responsible like this, a lot of the times, what he's looking to do is not only fight me at the upper body, but to fight me at the lower body. So he tries to come out and off of my hooks like this. He comes completely off my hooks and walks away. Now this is a position where we could do these things where we try to bring our heads together, go north-south with him, and pull him back up to a seated position, and then try to throw our hooks back in, but we can also just go for a north-south strangle. So if we come over this way, Jake, we'll just scoot over a little bit to the left so we have a little more room. So we're here. I'm bringing him down to the floor. He's defensively responsible, and he's coming off my hooks. He's completely disengaged his hips. He's gotten to the floor. Now I have to do something because if he keeps moving away from me and he dips his elbow to the mat, I've totally lost him. I have to move to a top pin or try to scramble to a better position. But while we're here, I can just bring my body to the outside and keep my head close to him. If my head is not close, I'm creating a distance. I'm creating a gap between my elbow and his elbow, and he can slip it inside. So if I don't have my head close, he can bring his elbow to the floor, and now he's definitely out. That's always how you know someone's out of the back position, is that they get their elbow to the floor. Because now I'm no longer behind his body. He has his elbow between him and I, just like a wizard from a dogfight. So when we get here, what I'm looking to do is come forward with my head and raise his head level with my shoulder. My strangle arm shoulder is raising his head up off the floor. If you put your right leg down, Jake, so you can see this. I'm raising his head up off the floor, and now I'm coming up. And as I'm coming up to this position, he might think what I'm doing is bringing him up so that I can take his back again and pull him back through and get my hooks back in place. But what we can do instead is we take our hand inside the forearm to shed this grip. He can't hang on because I'm holding his hand with my forearm, I'm putting my hand in his forearm so it stays in place, and I'm pulling this out. And now I immediately switch back to a deep north-south strangle. Now again, I'm too high, so what I need to do is post this away so you can't do that to me. I'm moving away from him, getting into a true north-south position. My hand is towards the floor, and I'm bringing my shoulder to my wrist. So from another angle, we'll do it from here. Jake is a good hand fighter. He comes off my hooks, and I keep my head close to his elbow. So maybe you guys can see it better in this angle, but if my head is away from my elbow and I try to do this, he could potentially bring his elbow back through mine into the floor, and now I've lost him. And I don't have the ability to raise his head at all either. So now I'm keeping everything tight. I can grab his wrist, I roll my wrist over his forearm, and now I'm coming off to the side. I'm raising his head up with my shoulder right here. His head's coming off the floor. I come into this position, and now while his head's raised, I just switch. I let my bicep go right over his head and right into this position. And now I'm turning my rib cage into his head again. I'm posting on this arm, so I'm getting outside of it, so he can't put it into my throat. And now I'm posting on the AC joint and sinking back. I'm throwing my weight back so my shoulder goes right onto his throat instead of on his upper pecs. And now I have my hand facing towards the floor. I'm backing up into this true north-south position. I can grab my own hand, and then I finish by bringing my shoulder to my wrist. Now let's talk about some ways that we can do this from a north-south or a side control pin. One of the really understated values of a side control or a north-south pin is the ability to restrict your partner's breathing. You can really put a lot of pressure on a partner that maybe you guys are in an intense match. The heart rate is already very, very high because of all the work that you've done before. And by the time you pass, the guy is exhausted. He fought you to the last breath, trying to make sure that you couldn't pass. And he wanted to make sure that if you did pass, you got into a good position, but you got into a side control or a north-south. So he's breathing very heavily. And what we can do is we can use a very specific style of pressure and an ability to raise the elbows in order to restrict his breathings on his lower rib cage. So the way we would do this is, say I'm in a side control, I want to try to get a flush connection of an underhook here. Right now, this is an issue insofar as he has this forearm in my throat. So it'd be very difficult for me to get any kind of meaningful grip here because he can start framing and making space when I try to move into this transition. So we're gonna use a really intelligent hand fighting technique from top, which is called an inside bicep tie. So I'm gonna take my hand, I keep it still under his elbow, but I bring it back and then I slide it inside of this hole that he's created with his elbow position. So I'm sliding it through this hole and then I'm connecting my hands in a 10-finger grip. The 10-finger grip is good because it gives me the most range. If I go all the way to a gable, it's tighter, but I don't have as much play in my elbows. So now I'm bringing my 10-finger grip in from here, and then I raise my elbows and I go over his head with my chest. Once I raise my elbows, you can see that now his forearm is no longer under my throat. And once it's no longer under my throat, I just bring my head down so that I can bring my elbow and my whole entire hand completely down and underneath of his arm. And now I slide it up and it's an underhook at this point. And all I have to do is use my head position to take his forearm to the outside. And now I have a flush underhook. This is much more controlling and it's gonna lead me into this ability to restrict his breathing better than if he had a forearm across his throat. So again, we go bicep tie. I'm opening my elbow and bringing my chest across his head. Now my chin is inside of his forearm. I bring my elbows back and then I shoot my hand inside and I use my head to come through the hole. Now once my head's through the hole, I have a flush connection of my arm into an underhook. Once I have the underhook, what I don't want to happen is Jake is going to take his hand and put it back under my chin and snake it inside and regain that position that I just worked to get rid of. So once I get here, I take my right ear to my right shoulder like this. So now if Jake tries to bring his hand inside there, there's no space. I completely control this arm at this point. And if we can control and isolate arms efficiently, we're going to be able to get a lot of submissions. This is how we actually start to break people down in jiu-jitsu. We use the ability to control and isolate limbs to start attacking them and gaining our submissions. So once we're here, I bring my I bring my ear to my shoulder. And now what we're looking to do is take our hand over top and we're gonna get into this position where my forearm is underneath of Jake's elbow and I move to a north-south. So I take one arm across his head and underneath of his elbow, and then I take my other arm across his hip so he can't follow me. If I don't go across his hip, he just keeps coming this way and I never create an angle. So I come here, I put one arm over, go and block his hip, and now I'm walking to north-south. Once I walk to north-south, I'm starting to put pressure by lifting his elbow and I have my hand facing down initially. And then as I'm walking in a circle, I'm still walking. I don't just stop here, I'm walking. And then once I get to this position, I'm turning my fist up and I'm putting my weight into his rib cage. Once his weight is in his rib cage, I can keep walking, and I can start to grab things like figure four backhanded arms or Kimuras here because I can grab his wrist, but I can also create this necessary condition to get his head off the floor. And then I go back down and I get a really flush connection. Again, we post outside the arm, sink our hips away, and start going in for the finish here. So I'll show this from the other angle so you guys can see this a little better. The way that we get the arm is still the same. So what we're doing, bicep tie, we use our elbow to open it up, bring our head to the inside, grab the underhook, bring my right ear to my right shoulder so Jake can't put his hand back in. I own this arm at this point. Now what we're doing, taking this elbow, putting my hand underneath of his elbow. I'm taking my other arm across body so you can't follow me, and I'm walking to this side. As I'm coming here, I'm bringing my hand high and across his chest. As I'm bringing my hand high and across his chest, I start to get to a point where I'm facing the opposite way as I started. So I was over here initially, and now I'm on this side of his body. As I'm coming on this side of his body, I'm taking my weight off of my knees and coming up, and I'm turning my fist downwards, up towards the ceiling. So as I'm bringing it up towards the ceiling, I'm putting, you can feel it. It's horrible. Like when somebody does this to you, it feels like you just can't breathe at all. So I'm coming from here to here, and I'm putting my weight into him. And then I keep walking the circle. And if I walk the circle enough, his wrist is completely out for me. And I can grab figure 4 backhand and arm or a Kimura to cover his head. But I can also be in this position and his head is raised enough for me to throw my north-south in and go the other direction he wouldn't be expecting. And now he's got his forearm in my throat. I move it to the outside. I put my hand on his AC joint to sink back. My palm is facing down and my shoulder goes to connect to my wrist for a really tight strangulation. So this is another really excellent way to create that top pressure that's gonna allow us to get under the elbows and have him thinking about his arms and his breathing and not thinking about his neck. A lot of times, guys will even kind of like arch out because the constriction of the breathing is so frustrating and painful at times that they'll be just wriggling because it's like they just want to get out of this position. And when they do that, they open their neck up more, you throw your arm around, and you start slinking your body back to finish them in a north-south strangle. So one more way we can do this is from a north-south itself. So if Jake's head's here, I'll go right here. Let's say I'm in the north-south. I have both elbows in right now. I could take one of my elbows inside of his elbows. So say I get it inside here, and I just get it inside of his elbow. Now what I'm doing is passing off to my knee. I pass off to my knee, and now I can take this hand and reach inside for the other wrist. I pull it down. Once I pull it down, I can get that same position of my hand underneath of his elbow. And I start walking and flipping my hand towards the ceiling, and I'm still putting that same pressure on him, where I'm putting all of my weight into his lower ribs. And now we can go back to this position and bring our head back, slink backwards, hands towards the floor, shoulder coming to hand to finish. So those are a couple excellent ways to use north-south and a couple excellent scenarios where it's perfectly suitable to be used. In this channel, I want to teach you guys a lot about not just moves, but when to use moves so that we use the correct moves at the correct time. When we're using some moves, there's times where they're suitable and there's times where they're completely unsuitable. And any scenario where we are in a north-south position or a top pin in general and we're able to get their head off the floor is a great time for us to start throwing our arm over the throat and then slinking back to this north-south strangle. So give it a shot, guys. Let me know how you like it and let me know what else you'd like to see on the channel. As always, this is Big Jake and Eddie with Crash and Flow BJJ.